So we've discussed making the move from VMware to AWS, but it seems we have forgotten about our friends over at Microsoft. Let's take a look at what it's like to dive into the world of Microsoft Azure. Hello, and welcome to the ExploreVM podcast. I'm your host, Paul Woodward Jr. Today's guest has taken the leap from a VMware admin to the world of Azure. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tom Greene. I'm a virtualization admin in the healthcare industry. I've been working with VMware for going on 10 years now. Been starting back in the 3.5 days and learning and growing in VMware all the way up to currently working with 6.0. And I've just always been very interested in learning and growing. So that kind of is what's bringing me here today.
Excellent. So did you start your career with VMware, or did you start in other technologies and just kind of led into it because you saw that's what was coming?
That's actually pretty interesting. I started as an accountant. I got a degree in economics out of college and got my first job as a bookkeeper for a real estate company. And I've always said that I kind of wasn't really great at that. I didn't really have the mind for it, I guess, and so I made the economic decision to jump into IT when I was given an opportunity to be a desktop support technician. So I kind of cut my teeth with Microsoft, Windows XP, and Server 2003, and I was working with that. And simultaneously, my manager at the time just handed me a book that was VMware, maybe Mastering VMware 3.5, and said, read through this and see if you want to use this for our next upgrade. And if you do, let's see if we can figure it out. It's kind of where everything started with me and VMware.
Nice, and that's nice to have that kind of input, at your job when it's like, okay, we're going to completely change platforms for what we do.
Yes, I really had no IT experience at all. He just knew that I could add laptops onto the wireless, and that's where it all started. And so it was kind of cool that this guy, he was a CCIE, and he saw something in me, I guess, and just went to his desktop support guy and said, hey, do you think VMware is the way we should go, or should we just buy another set of bare metal Dell servers?
So after 10 years with VMware, why did you decide to take a dive into the world of Azure?
Well, a couple of years ago, I was working with the VAR and helped to launch their cloud practice. And I've always thought the cloud was pretty cool and it was going to be a great thing for startups or new business. And now working in enterprise healthcare, I see cloud growing to such a point that it's no longer a if we're going to go to the cloud, it's a when are we going to go to the cloud. And it's not a should, but how. And I want to be on the forefront of that. Like I was kind of starting with VMware before it took over the small medium business, and so I'm kind of hoping to jump onto a cloud platform. And I chose Azure because, as I said, I started as a Microsoft tech. I've always had a soft spot for Microsoft, and I think it's really going to kick fire with Azure Stack coming up, and it's getting feature parity and getting really close to AWS.
Have you had any other experience with other cloud offerings? And if so, how do they compare to Azure?
Yeah. The cloud practice for the VAR that I was running was with AWS. And it was probably 2.5, 3 years ago that we really got started with that. And so AWS was well documented, but it wasn't as big as it is now. So it was kind of learning and figuring out how to do an infrastructure as a service deployment to help some startups. So we're doing the Workspaces VDI as a service whenever it first came out, deploying that for a small client who couldn't afford a VDI solution but desperately needed it. And so I've got some experience on the AWS there, and Azure's kind of the same but different. I think Azure has a more enterprise focus almost. They've really tried to integrate their Office 365 with the Azure account with your local Active Directory. So it's all kind of one directory if you have it set up right. And so that's pretty cool for a way to get in. And then with every enterprise has an ELA, and Microsoft is just making it rain credits for Azure into your ELA. So kind of how they're how they're different is just kind of that. I think that AWS is really developer friendly. And I'm not saying that Azure isn't, but Azure is kind of easier for a infrastructure guy like me who's used to racking, stacking servers and installing ESXi and going through my day to day in that silo. It's a little bit easier transition to some of the parts of Azure.
And I'll preface this by saying I've not actually touched Azure yet. I've done almost exclusively AWS at this point. And something I've seen is it feels more like with AWS, everything's awesome with Linux, and sometimes with Windows it's a little bit more difficult, and it certainly seems to be a little bit more pricey when you want to run a Windows instance versus a Linux instance. Is that something that maybe I'm completely wrong on, or do you see that obviously deploying Microsoft on a Microsoft platform with Azure is easier, or does it go smoother, or any kind of thoughts like that?
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. In the documentation, everything is a Windows server. Whenever you're going through the Azure's documentation, it's how to deploy a Windows Server 2016 into Azure is kind of the default. And they have a lot of Linux support. They're part of the Linux Foundation, and they really have worked on that a lot. But yeah, it's definitely focused more on their server. And they do have a program of giving you, I think it's set up to 40% discount if you bring your own license or if you're using some ELA credits. I'm not super deep into that, but I know that they do cut the price pretty drastically for using a Windows instance and have your own license for that. And they have license mobility so that you can very easily decide where your license is going to sit.
So when moving workloads to Azure, do you feel they run better if they're cloud native, or have you seen just bringing stuff that's in a VMware data center over to Azure seems to move pretty well?
Well, with a cloud platform in general, there's interesting things that you have to take into consideration if you're just going to do a lift and shift. So I think cloud native or cloud ready applications are going to be an easier transition. If you have a bunch of web servers that are stateless and that just talk to a database in the back end, that would be a lot easier to shift into Azure than if you have a application that's stateful and that's always going to keep growing. The biggest consideration and the thing that was really the hardest for me as a VMware admin to wrap my head around is how high availability and those different disaster recovery methods that I take for granted with my servers now. They're totally different in the cloud and in the cloud model. Like you have to run multiple copies of the same server and cluster them if you want to have the same sort of availability features as a VMware HA instance. It's just really hard to kind of wrap your head around when you're first getting started, I think.
Have you noticed any gotchas with Azure? With AWS, like getting your data back out is like I wouldn't say hidden cost, it's out there, but it trips a lot of people up. Is there anything like that with Azure, or any features that are surprisingly expensive, or they don't work quite as well from what you've seen?
Well, one thing, as I kind of mentioned already, I'm really interested in the VDI as a service. I've used workspaces personally and professionally, and I think that's neat. I think it's interesting that Azure doesn't have that sort of functionality. So if that is something that interests you and you're looking for a cloud platform, then maybe that's not something you're going to find there. And there is also the data cost. Any cloud provider is going to make sure that it hurts a little bit to get your data out, especially if you're doing a massive migration out. The big gotcha, or the the thing that I find interesting is AWS has worked very, very hard to make sure you can get your data up there with Snowball or Snowmobile. I mean, they'll drive an 18-wheeler to your data center if you want them to. But whenever we're talking with Azure and they're like, how do you get it up there, is they just FedEx you a hard drive. Like they haven't really worked on that sort of data transport. And I'm not sure if that's just by design or they've just think it'll be easier to get your data up there without a big showy device or something. I'm not sure. But getting the data up there in a mass fashion is just going to be hard drives that are FedEx to you.
Is Azure something you're currently using in your professional life, or did you decide to take this path on your own, under your own ambition?
It's a lot of the ambition and a little bit of the profession. I've always thought cloud is going to be huge just all over. And 2 or 3 years ago, it was definitely the right thing for the startups. But now it's no longer a question of if it's enterprise ready or should an enterprise consider it. It's more when is the enterprise going to fully embrace it? Even a glacial enterprise like healthcare, it still it's coming. And I like to be on that forefront. Like I said, I took a really deep dive into VMware whenever I was a desktop support technician. I consider it a bit of a risk. In retrospect, is the weakest risk ever, but it was a bit of a risk to say, okay, I'm going to pick this technology, and it could have been the Novell. It could have just fizzled out, and I would have spent all that time and then just had to say, what am I going to do now? So I'm kind of hanging my hat on Azure in a personal sense, and I'm trying to get the certifications and get a good understanding. And it's a little hard to learn a cloud service whenever you're used to that hardware and infrastructure. So there's a lot of differences. And in an enterprise silo especially, there's a storage team, a network team, an OS team, a database team. And so when you're trying to learn it, you have to break out of that silo. You have to be able to expand your knowledge and even reach out to the community and talk about, hey, I don't fully understand how routing works, or can you explain the difference between a blob storage and a queue storage, whatever you need to learn, whatever you need to do. So the long answer to your question is that, but professionally, it's not here yet, but the writing is on the wall. And to me, in a good way, that it's coming. But personally, I just love to continue education and to mentor and encourage people to do that. And I think that Azure is a pretty safe place to go. Really, the main reason I jumped in with it instead of AWS is because everyone else has been doing AWS to death for the past 6 months. There's a lot of people are writing and learning and getting all 5 certifications, and I got really jealous and I decided to cut them off at the pass on Azure. It's I'll get here and then I'll circle back around to AWS if it becomes professionally interesting to me. But personally, I kind of love what I've seen so far with Azure.
That's actually kind of my plan. I'm going down the AWS path personally, and then we had another employee who's going down the Azure route. And then once we were both kind of to a point where we felt we could deploy them, we were going to flip-flop and then co-train each other and both get certified on the opposite technology just to be well-rounded as a consultant. It's kind of was super useful to do that. I'm still in the middle of my AWS journey, though, so this conversation is really intriguing to me. So you said you reached out within the community to figure out answers, and you want to keep expanding your knowledge. What training materials did you use? What resources did you utilize to learn Azure?
There's a lot of really great free first-party Microsoft training for Azure. They're really, really trying to get people to learn this. And I've recently started a blog series on my journey with Azure and trying to help train other people who are in my spot 6 months ago. And so I've got a huge list of all of that. But the coolest thing that I think Microsoft has done is they've got a website called openedx.microsoft.com. And it's a completely free series of, I think, 29 or 30 courses. And they're legitimate courses. It takes hours to get through them with labs and practice exams. And it's just a really great place to get some intensive training and really get deep hands-on. And they all have links back to, if you want even more information, the actual documentation for what they were talking about in the module at the bottom of every page. So openedx.microsoft.com is probably my most recommended way for someone who's really interested and really willing to spend some time. then they also have some video series. It's Microsoft Virtual Academy. If you're more of a subscription video series learner, Linux Academy surprisingly has a huge section on Azure, which kind of threw me for a loop when I first saw it, because it's obviously a Microsoft technology. Why would it be on Linux Academy? But it's there, and the stuff is really good. Another resource that's really good is the Microsoft Visual Studio Dev Essentials program. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's a free program where they give developers, or anybody, you don't have to be a developer professionally, a lot of free subscriptions, and they give you like $25 a month of free time on Azure to play. And it can be used for any tool. It's not like the AWS free account that has, you can only run this one type of machine and this one type of database. It's, you got $25, go do what you want with it. And it also has 3-month trials to Pluralsight and Linux Academy and multiple other training. So you can probably knock out a certification or get pretty deep through some of the series in 3 months.
So what certifications do you have around Azure? What were those like? And are you looking to take other certification exams as well?
I'm a certification hog. I've got probably 30. It's kind of become a hobby for me. I didn't start out as a computer science major or any sort of training, so everything I've done has been self-study. And so I kind of take it as a badge of honor every time I pass one, even though at a certain point it feels silly. The Azure certification that I do have is the 7533, which is the Azure infrastructure. And it was focused mainly on web apps and virtual machines and storage, kind of the high-level things that an infrastructure VMware type admin has a basis of understanding. The really interesting thing that's changed since the last time I took a Microsoft exam, which was for the MCSA 2012, is that there's really big focus on PowerShell. They've always said you have to know PowerShell to pass a Microsoft test, even back in the 2012 days, but there would maybe a question or two. And in these Azure certifications, there's script building. I'm not going to dig too deep into what it is for NDA purposes, but you actually have to understand how PowerShell works more than just using context clues to understand what a command is trying to do. So it was really a fun exam, to be honest, just because you get in there and not expecting anything like that. And it's just, well, Microsoft exams have really changed in the past 4 years, 3 years, something like that. So there's 3 or 4 different tests about Microsoft Azure, and any combination of them will get you different Microsoft certifications. So I think if you get 2 of them, it's developing Azure solutions and implementing Azure infrastructure. You can get the MCSA in cloud, and if you already have an MCSA in cloud and take another one of them, you can get the MCSE in cloud. And then if you take all 3 of the Azure certifications, which would be developing, implementing infrastructure, and architecture, you can get the Microsoft Certified Solution Developer for Azure Architect. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. I've already got the MCSE Cloud, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and take the other 2 to knock them out to get that Azure Architect. That's actually a pretty cool sounding certification.
So with your blog series that you're working on, is it like an Azure 101? Are there deep dives into various technical aspects of Azure? What do you got going on with that?
I started it all out with just how do you get started with the cloud technology? And even before the Azure series started, I started it with AWS and said, here are some cheap ways to really learn AWS. And I think I got down $10, and then you could probably study for a year on everything I put out there. And then whenever I started professionally being hinted that I should start looking toward Microsoft's offering, I did the same thing. I'd already passed the 7533 Azure infrastructure certification. So I took all the resources I used for that and compiled them. And someone reached out to me, Ariel Sanchez Mora reached out to me and said, hey, can you explain this with screenshots and tell me what you want to do if you're a VMware admin? And that kind of kicked off my series. Ariel's one of the greatest people I know, and he has always pushed me to be better. And so that's kind of how that started, is him saying, I want to see screenshots of what it looks like in the console. And so I went out there and I've decided the overall theme is going to be, how do your VMware skills translate into using them in Azure? So what is the different concepts? And it's 101 right now, but it keeps trying to get deeper. And it even tries to get deeper than I know how to get. So right now there's just one that says, here's how to use the wizard to deploy a virtual machine. And then the next one is about storage accounts, which is one of the optional features in that wizard. So they're getting deeper into each of the little checkboxes and drop downs. I'm going to try to explore all those. And once I get through that and kind of have a good grasp on virtual machines, I'll probably go into some of the platform as a service or some of the more abstract concepts that don't have a direct tie to VMware technology.
So if the listener isn't a VMware admin, will the blog series still be useful to them? Is it still enough about Azure that they can dive in and learn? Or is it really, really tightly integrated with VMware?
It's not very tightly integrated. I try to relate some of the concepts. Like when I'm talking about a storage account, I liken it to a data store in VMware and how it might be the same and different. But there's still a click-for-click walkthrough of how to deploy the virtual machine with the wizard and what each individual field says or what they mean. So if you have never touched VMware, you could probably go through and follow the wizard still. And you're like, well, what type of redundancy does a storage account have? And what are the 4 options for that? And do we want the redundancy to be separated across different regions, or how do we want to do the availability for this machine? Do we care? So I explained what each of those different features means in some decent detail. And then I try to relate the concept to a VMware concept. So it'd be pretty easy to strip all that out if VMware meant nothing to you. If you were just setting on desktop support and saying Azure is the way to go, you could still follow along and get a lot out of it, I hope.
We've got some common interests outside of continuing education and continuing to grow ourselves. We both like to give back and be involved with the community. Why don't you talk about your involvement with the V Brown Bag?
The V Brown Bag is a great program. I've been a viewer. I tried to make it to the live shows every Wednesday for a while, probably a year. And not too long ago, again, sounds like I'm going to just be shouting out Ariel constantly. He contacted me and asked if I wanted to host some of them because he knew I was always there and was really interested. And so I kind of jumped in at that point, and it's been great. I've been doing a couple every month, and I've been able to kind of be on your side of the microphone at this point, but get some really good training and content out there. And if the listeners have never checked it out, go to youtube.com/vbrownbag or vbrownbag.com and look, there's probably a video series or some videos that are relevant to where you're at right now. There's been some AWS certification videos that are recorded in a series, and we're doing some NSX stuff and some vSAN stuff right now. So there's some really good stuff, and it just feels great to know that I'm a part of a program that's giving out free, high-quality training from industry experts. On top of that, I've founded a VMUG and been a VMUG leader for a couple of years. So I've tried to bring the experts in that community into my personal community too, and try to be as active locally in mentoring and bringing education in as I can. It's a little hard to get everyone excited, and it's easy on the internet to find somebody who wants to learn and wants to develop that kind of a friendship and relationship. Locally, I don't know if people just don't want to talk all the time or don't want to ask for help all the time. So I do what I can to bring those resources to the people who are here and want to really get into it, want to further their careers.
Are there any Azure series on the horizon within vBrownBag?
There have been murmurings, but I can't confirm anything. There's nothing on the schedule right now that I know of. Watch this space. I'm sure if there's enough demand and if the Azure keeps growing like it is right now, that there will be some Azure content out there, even if I have to do it myself.
So with VMworld coming up in a couple of months here, I know the vBrownBag community is very heavily involved with the Tech Talks, kind of like an independent series that runs at VMworld where people can share whatever stories or information they'd like. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Tech Talk program is actually a really great opportunity. It allows you to sign up and give a 10-minute talk on a stage that's live streamed during VMworld. And there's a lot of really interesting things that opens up whenever you're talking to your coworkers or to the bosses or directors and you're saying, oh yeah, I've got a speaking slot at VMworld. The whole process is you submit your talk, say what it's going to be, and then you get 10 minutes, you're live streamed on YouTube, and there will be a live crowd who's there to watch you. And if it's the first time that you've ever done anything like that, it's going to be the most terrifying thing that you'll ever love that you did. I've heard I did it, and it kind of was almost a launching point for a lot of the different things that I'm doing. But through that is where I met a lot of different friends and how I've gotten involved with many of the different organizations and groups that I'm doing now. So yeah, it's 10 minutes, but it goes by very fast. I've heard from some people that they regretted not doing it. Would you know anything about that kind of regret, Paul?
So we're gonna pull in a little bit of the pre-recording conversation. Yes, last year I was at VMworld and I partook in many of the Tech Talks, and I almost signed up and I didn't. And after the fact, I'm like, why didn't I do that? So this year I'm definitely going to be submitting, I think 2, maybe even 3 ideas for sessions, and see if any of them get picked, and be more than willing to stand up and share my knowledge with the community and give back to that community that has helped me so very much.
Yeah, and I'd encourage everybody, if you're going to be there and you have some downtime, to go hang out at the vBrownBag stage and just watch some of these things. There's some really cool people and some really influential people in the industry that just kind of hang out there. You're likely to be standing talking to someone, just making chit chat, and they're a triple VCDX or a double VCDX, and you don't even know. But a lot of really smart and really cool people are going to be hanging out there.
Yeah, I agree. I was standing there chatting with one of my friends, and I looked around and I looked back at him, and I'm like, I'm standing in the middle of my Twitter feed right now. It's all these people I follow, and I learn from, or I read their posts, I read their blogs, I listen to their podcasts, and it's just, I can walk up and say, hello, thank you for what you do, like, thank you for the content you generate, thank you, you help me solve a problem. It's really awesome to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's I like hearing it personally. I like seeing people's reactions whenever you say, "Oh, you really helped me. Your blog saved me 5 hours or 4 hours, or the script that you wrote kept me from banging my head into a corner for a long time trying to do something manually." So it's really cool to see that and to be able to talk to those people. I guess you and I are kind of those people too.
Yep, definitely making the transition from one side of that group to the other, but I will forever be a content consumer of everybody I follow and everybody I learn from and I meet.
Yeah, I remember I had some problems with an upgrade once, and I reached out to you and you helped me. So I really appreciate that, and so I've always appreciated everything you've done with that too.
Well, thank you. That's like you just said. It's good to hear that.
And you too could have that sort of feeling if you come to the vBrownBag stage and
just bring it full circle. All right, Tom. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Where can people find you? Are you socially active? Do you blog? Do you rant somewhere? Where can we find you?
I've got a blog, and it's thomgreene.com. It's THOMGREENE. If you spell it the traditional thomgreene.com, there's some Canadian comedian that you'll run into. So I've got an H and D in there. You can find me on Twitter at TBGREE00. And I'm always on there. I get alerted a lot. I post all kinds of GIFs and different pictures. If you want to interact and talk, every Wednesday I'm on the V Brown Bag Tech Talks, either in the chat room or hosting. And it's a live show, so you can easily tweet at us, and chat with us, and talk to us. It's every Wednesday night at 8:30 Eastern or 7:30 Central. You can sign up for that at vbrownbag.com. The content's always free, and it's always a good time. So even if it's just you see a name that you recognize and you want to get in and say hi to them, we open up the mics and let people talk and just have a good time.
I'll be sure to post all the links in the show notes on ExploreVM.com, including your posts with every resource for the Azure training and certification. Once again, I'd like to thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you're going to VMworld 2017, stop me and say hi. Pick up an ExploreVM sticker, pin, or even better, let's record a short session for an upcoming episode. Until then, you can find me on Twitter at ExploreVM, Facebook.com/ExploreVM, or email me, paul@ExploreVM.com. Once again, thank you for listening.